You're listening to a vXchnge podcast.
Welcome to the vXchnge podcast. I'm your host, Ellis Booker. Today's topic is hot data center trends this year and next. We're going to discuss how startup companies are leveraging data centers and how this is going to play into the market and influence data center growth, both in the United States and internationally. Silicon Valley may be the hub of tech sector activity, but when it comes to data centers, cloud, and mobile, there's plenty to talk about around the world. Helping us delve into both of these subjects is today's guest, Sarah Rauschwerger, founder and managing director of TechLab Innovation Center. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Ellis. Thank you for inviting me today.
To start off, Sarah, tell us a bit about TechLab Innovation Center.
Well, it's very simple. We focus on helping early to mid-stage technology companies with a developed data-driven product or service to help them scale up their business operation to the cloud. It's a trend that's going around, and we will discuss that a little bit later. What we're looking for is to help these companies leverage on an ultra-fast and reliable state-of-the-art technology, particularly the one that we are residing next to at Santa Clara, California. And the way we do this is we have different platforms, and one of them is to provide a rich mentor society on top of a huge ecosystem, especially since we're in Silicon Valley. We have lots of individuals that help us with providing, guidance on business operation, business development, technology development, because we work with an ecosystem that includes corporate investors, because part of building your business, you always need an injection of funding and an opportunity to partner with some of these companies because you could never work alone. So this is kind of the core basis of what TechLab Innovation does. And we actually, we work with all the companies that join our facility, and it tends to be based on a selection process because we want to make sure that they're successful.
TechLab has been working with the technology startup community for over a decade. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of these startups you work with. I'm sure you've seen some evolution in how companies, especially startups, are shifting their approaches to data support. Can you tell us what you've seen, Sarah?
Yes, this is actually an amazing change. It's funny enough to say that if you go back in time a little bit, looking back in the 90s, data centers initially actually just served web servers. I mean, it was just companies who needed some space for internet access. But we're not there anymore. We've completely changed. We have grown in leaps and bounds, leveraging on data centers, but in a completely different way. And the market opportunities have come from the introduction of devices. We've got mobile devices. We've got, the laptops, the iPads, just in general, all these different platforms down to the streaming of TVs. All of these devices need to be connected. So what happens? What happens when all of these devices need connected? They're streaming data, and that data needs to be stored somewhere, and this is the whole evolution of cloud. You've got two sides of it. You've got, the cloud computing, where you've got technology companies building platform on that versus devices being connected through applications that are being built by, technology companies. If you're looking at some of the trends of where we're going today, look at what we're hitting. We've got virtual reality, self-driving cars, the whole wearable industry. Apple just introduced their iWatch. Well, that's connected to your iPhone. So there's information that's being passed through there. Drones, 3D printing. A huge industry that's being hit is the IoT, the Internet of Things. All of this ends up in something that other companies are working on. It's big data, analytics that you're providing information from, enterprise application, security, and privacy. So it's created a whole huge industry that ends up landing in the data center. So all these, these trends are, is something that we've seen in the startup, and each startup is focusing on a different piece of it. So we've seen, a lot of companies now focusing on big data, analytics, And what we've seen, especially at Tech Lab, there's been kind of a merge between different companies. We have one company that's been working on deep learning. Well, deep learning is actually collecting information, leveraging on sensors and cameras to look at what's around you. But in order to do that, you need another company who's going to build the database to understand, well, what is this information that we're collecting doing, and how can we leverage on the business side of it? So it's a huge change, huge impact on our industry, on our environment, on our lifestyle, which impacts a growth of data centers.
You mentioned the profusion of devices, and I just have a note on my desk here. According to Cisco's latest VNI Global IP Traffic Forecast, which they released in May, there will be something like 24 billion network devices and connections globally by 2019. That's up from about 14 billion in 2014. I suppose that this phenomenal growth is in part behind these data center trends, as you mentioned. What's the most difficult thing that startups in particular are confronting when it comes to their data management sort of issues, and how are you there at Tech Lab helping them out?
Well, let's just hit the Cisco part, because I think that's interesting as well. Cisco has a keen interest in this growth. They're betting on the IoT for all these connected devices everywhere, which would actually require them to provide more servers and more network capabilities. Well, based on this, it breeds a new demand on data centers that also requires kind of a changing environment for the data center. They also have to update, some of the opportunities and the problems that are faced by data centers. I'll give you an example, virtualization. It's been a hot topic for a while. And it's actually, funny enough, it was, invented by IBM in the 1950s. It's not a new technology. So some of these ideas that have been around for a while are now creating a new opportunities for a lot of these, the startups who are leveraging on some of the difficulties and issues they need to face in order to solve some of these problems. However, some of the problems are the trade-offs, both on the business side and on the technical side. For example, another one is, how to apply flash rendering on servers, the storage hierarchy, securities and privacy, which are huge today. How do you build these technologies so you can accommodate all these connected devices? I mean, you and I connected through mobile phones, through, watching our, TV at our home. It actually taps into our private lives. How do we solve these problems? So if we look at, for example, we have 3 companies in our center. One of them is working on storage hierarchy. They're looking at solving these problems. Another one is encryption technology for security, which I think is huge. It's very interesting because we're all worried about security, and we've seen some of the things that have happened, for example, with Target. How do we leverage on that? I mean, we're working with these particular companies at Tech Lab to create an opportunity both from the data center side of providing these services for companies that are building, as simple as apps like the Uber, and, there's so many apps out there that are being built that are now being installed on our phones. I mean, our phones have become a lifestyle, a way of living and doing things every day of our lives. So it's on both sides of the, I would say on both sides of the pond. You've got one side where, you've got the consumer side, and then on the other side, you've got the enterprise side. So at Tech Lab, what we're focusing is on solving both problems. So we have both the, if I look at it from the consumer development side to as simple as apps, down to developing products and services to enhance data center services to these end users.
Right. For me, and just watching from the outside, one of the fascinating things is, and we could spend 2 hours probably talking about how cloud APIs are changing what startups do. But, in the old days, you had to build all these applications on premise, right, and create all this infrastructure on premise. And now, thanks to cloud and the data centers that make all that possible, you can create a service offering by coupling together all these interesting things. Google here, security there, and bang, you've got a business, right?
That's correct. It used to be that it took, from an investment perspective, it used to take between 3 to 5 years to build a business. Today, the expectation on an investment side is 18 months turnaround. So if you look at the process of building, I'm going to look at as simple as an app. You shouldn't spend that much money to build an app. You do the development. The challenge naturally is then getting these applications into the market. But with cloud, with social media today, the penetration of all these opportunities to get into the market. I mean, for companies like Box that allows you to put all the documents and share it among your peers becomes so much easier relative to what it used to be. So the time scale is much faster.
Right. Well, you mentioned Box. Yeah, you mentioned Box just now as an example of a company that I don't think existed 3 years ago.
No.
What are some of the interesting ways, especially startups, the companies you're working with, are leveraging the data center? Can you give us some examples, either in the States or elsewhere?
So, for example, we're working with a company that's building an e-commerce platform. It's basically intended for companies it's targeting the moms in the community who would like to buy clothes for their children when you're pregnant. It's just an app. It's a basic app. If you look behind the scene at the logistic of this app, it's huge because we're taking what used to be the bricks and mortars of going to a store and buying it onto the cloud, where everything is in the cloud, the purchasing down to the shipping, to collecting the product and putting it in, from the manufacturers all the way to the door of the consumer. That process is all in the cloud today. So imagine the data that's going behind the scene. If you look at what the startups are doing today, initially they start with Amazon. They go on to, a cloud platform that Amazon builds for startups and allows them to kind of get the process started. But at the next level, there's going to be a point where scalability is very important. So what do you need to do next? When you start looking at the financial perspective of what it takes to scale business, leveraging on cloud platforms like Amazon, it becomes extremely expensive. So you have to get off that system. What's the most efficient is getting your own platform, your own servers, your own network, and that's when you move to the data center because it's about scalability. Scalability is also controlling your environment. Leaving your platform on Amazon is not sufficient. So the way we leverage, if you look at Tech Lab, some of these companies, what we're doing is you've got to get the business aspect going. The company I'm mentioning, if you look at right now, they have 30,000 users. They need to move it to the next step. 30,000 users to get to the next step requires a huge back-end platform that can work effectively and quickly. As a consumer, again, this is an e-commerce platform. When I press the buy, I want everything to work.
Right, and the latency questions are there too. You don't want to have a 2-second delay, but I love the e-commerce sites that warn you not to hit the purchase button twice because you're impatient, right? Because their data center is not keeping up with our one button immediate satisfaction, where we get annoyed when it's a second and we hit it twice and then we get charged twice or something like that.
Well, that will actually, from a perspective of technologist, if you understand that element, you would know that's a startup versus a more advanced company. A more advanced company then moves their infrastructure into an environment in a data center where they're now in control, and they control the latency. They control the servers. They control everything that's in there. They're not relying on cloud services like Amazon or, Google. There's IBM, Bluemix that provides all of these platforms for the startup community, SAP. There's a lot of these platforms that the startups are leveraging. And the reason they're doing this initially is because naturally it's easier. to invest in infrastructure, it's not the first thing you're going to do because you want to make sure that there's a business opportunity. Once you get the traction, then you move into the cloud. So our mission at TechLab is to get you through that hump of getting that business traction so you could then scale your operation. And when we say scale is, all right, it's time to invest in servers. It's time to build that platform and be a serious company.
And speaking of that platform, that control of your own data destiny, let's call it, is TechLab's partnership with vXchnge. Can you tell us about that partnership, Sarah, and what vXchnge has brought to the table?
It has been extremely valuable, and that's the reason TechLab partnered with vXchnge. I mean, vXchnge has the infrastructure and the network to provide this to our, our tenants, and it's not all our tenants, but it's our whole ecosystem that's working with us, and that's where we see the value. I mean, naturally, it increases both our businesses, and it helps the companies leverage a state-of-the-art data center, which is very important because the infrastructure is set for them, and they could just go in. I mean, one of the companies that walked into vXchnge, one of our companies, it didn't take very long. They brought their servers, they set it up, power was set in, everything was set up very quickly. So we see a huge benefits for our companies because of the seamless process.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Alice.
And that's all the time we have for this episode of the vXchnge podcast. If you'd like to hear other podcasts or suggest show topics, please visit the vXchnge link that appears above.
You've been listening to a vXchnge podcast.